Very warm welcome to 2Macs&aDramS, brought to you by Liquor City Claremont with Hector Macbeth and myself, Guy McDonald. In these trying times of pandemic, we have to escape to the world of whiskey, the world of wine, the world that we used to know. And today I'm very excited because not only are we escaping into the world of liquor, but we're escaping out of South Africa and we're heading to Japan, aren't we, Hector?
Absolutely. Warm welcome to everybody. Yeah, in these very trying times. At least we'll keep drinking until such time that our stocks run out, which might be a while. Let's say we just have a little gather down there.
Look at that.
Another week or so.
I'm already running low.
It's so tough, and everybody I'm speaking to in the industry as well, Guy, you can just feel the pain out there. Everybody knows it's just a disaster. You know, and it's just getting worse, and it's just poor leadership, you know, and I suppose at the end of the day, when you're going to put fear of death above life itself, you're going to run into these sort of situations. So hopefully at some stage they have enough to drink and change the laws all back so that we can carry on with our lives.
Maybe they haven't had enough quality drink to drink, so maybe you should actually send some of your personal stock to the president, sort him out. That'll help, I'm sure.
You know, the problem is he'll then know where I stay. And he'll be after me in a jiffy.
Very true.
Absolutely. So it's a very interesting one that we're doing today. It's almost, I would say, like a sort of cult history of Japanese whiskey. It's one of the sort of real struggle stories as well. So we're talking about the Akuto family. The Akuto family were sake makers in the 1600s. And after many, many years in that, sort of in the just towards the end of World War II, probably between 1941 and 1946, they managed to re-register their brew house to a distillery. So since 1946, they've been distilling whiskey. And the original sort of look at whiskey, obviously at that stage, Suntory had been going for 20 years, White Oak had been going for 30 years, and Nika themselves had been around since 1934. So it was predominantly blended whiskey, sort of, you know, in fact, the term they used for whiskey there was like the Western style drink. That was the term used by the Japanese. So foreigners drink, as it were. And they then decided, you know what, let's start focusing on whiskey. And they did quite a good job. Typical sort of making a blended style, easy to drink, everyday style of whiskey. And then Isouji Akuto, the great-grandfather of the Count Akuto that's making big news with the Chichibu distillery, he sort of really started to, since about 1981, make quality single malt whiskey. And that was his sole focus. And so he started doing that. He got a beautiful regiment of mostly sherry casks. So they were making a beautiful style of malted whiskey and aging in almost exclusively sherry butts. And the distillery was called Hanyu. Unfortunately, he was probably 20 years ahead of his time. And so he just never got the commercial success that he required. The company that he owned, Teo Shuzo, they were very, very well known for blending. So their blends always did well, and they imported a lot of Scotch, which to this day under the label Golden Horse, which is one of the most beautiful whiskies you'll drink. And there's always a debate, do you call it Japanese or do you call it Scotch? Because it is typically blended Scotch, but blended by the Japanese to this sort of product. And they really, really are talented at what they do. So I think their kind of input to blending actually does make it a little bit sort of more uniquely Japanese as well.
Do you think?
So that's kind of that.
Do you think that input, because we know that they're very detail driven, aren't they? And they're very focused on, and I would imagine, if I think about it literally or laterally, it's like the West would create a recipe with a bit of flair perhaps, and oh, well, let's just see, whereas to my imagination, the Japanese are a little bit more precise. Would you say that would be a correct assumption to make? And maybe that's the difference with their blending.
And I think there's even more to the Japanese culture, which is very difficult to understand from a Western point of view. I mean, every time I think I've kind of started to understand what Japanese people believe and think in, I'm completely wrong. So I'll never make that assumption. But from an outsider's point of view, what's interesting about them is, number one, the important thing is they don't share product. Okay, they don't have that. It just doesn't happen. So, to make barrels, you need 35 malt distilleries and 6 grain whiskies to put that blend together. So they don't do that. So if you want to make a blend in Japan, you need to have a malt and a grain whiskey to blend those together. You need to own both, because you can't get grain for one guy and malt for another guy. They just don't do it. There's also it's a double reason for that. Number one is the competition board doesn't allow it. There's no monopolies allowed in Japan. Any company that gets too big, they will then, rather than scaling down and selling off assets, what they'll do is they will then fund another company to widen the load. So that's how they grow their business, by widening a category. So if they're the sole guy that's dominating 50%, the only way they can grow past 50% to become dominant is to expand the market and make more people drink beer if they want to have a bigger beer share. That's how they do it. So it's a very interesting culture that kind of forces them to think that way, like, listen, you can only get that big, then you need to grow the category as opposed to dominating a category, which is rife in South Africa. We sit with huge monopolies dominating. They don't have that issue at all. So there has to be a lot of sharing of knowledge and precision without the monopolizing. And I think that's also why they're a little bit more, they can be a little bit more precise, because the accountants are never going to take over their business to become bottom line perfect and purely 100%, bottom line driven, because they realize we have to grow the category with us. We can't do it man alone. So I think those things combined makes for a very, very interesting sort of story. Right now, Japan whiskey is probably at its all-time high from a sales point of view internationally. So I think because they're on such a high and doing such exceptional numbers, a lot of people are trying to cash in on that. So we have lots of brands that are called Japanese whiskey because the laws in Japan are not very strict. So you can, for example, one of the companies imports Canadian whiskey and they bottle it in Japan and it's called
Japanese whiskey.
Japanese whiskey.
Wow.
And there's no law against them doing that. Obviously, the Western world becomes problematic because now the Western world has all of these guys saying, look, Japanese whiskey is hot. So everybody's now, let's get a barrel of Japanese whiskey and we add whatever we want to it, bottle it in Japan and then send it back out as Japanese whiskey. So that is the problem. Because of their great success, they're now actually a danger to themselves because now people are making fake Japanese whiskey, as it were, and challenging that big marketplace that obviously previously used to dominate just Japanese. So what the world bought into is that authentic Japanese craft and style, and now it's been sort of mimicked, which is quite funny because it's kind of a full reversal, because 100 years ago, Japanese were mimicking Scotch, and the Akuto family will tell you that they did everything they could to mimic Scotch. They wanted to create the perfect Scottish blend, okay? And along the way, interestingly enough, they created what is quintessentially Japanese whiskey in style. Just because they were forced in the 50s, they weren't allowed to import oak barrels, so they had to use Japanese oak. So Japanese oak is a water oak, so it gives you a slight different style of flavor, but which we now associate with uniquely Japanese flavor profiling. So this is obviously what happened. So the brand we're looking at today is called Sanmi Ittai, which is the Japanese equivalent of Trinitas. It means the three. And it really is just, unfortunately in 2001, the Hanyu distillery closed. All that stock was bought out by the grandson Akuto and by a company called One Drinks Company. And then Teo Shuzo, who was the company that was bought, they let go of the single malt, but they kept some stocks left. So they've continued with their Golden Horse brand, which is blended Scotch, obviously, but done in Japan and sold as a Japanese whiskey. So about 3 years ago, they had probably 10 or 15 barrels left of the Hanyu in stock. They're all reaching quite old now, 20 odd years. And if you went on auction, you're paying 30, 40,000 Rand a bottle. Wow. So they kind of went, they grabbed that finally, there is a success for the brand and it's something that everybody would like to get their hands on, the final Hanyu cast and so on. But rather than do that themselves, they decided they would blend those down. So what they've done is they've taken those last bits and they've blended them down because the three that they're praising is Isouji Akuto and his two master blenders, Inoue and Shimaki. They were his two master blenders at the time, so those are the three. So now what they've done is they've reblended Hanyu into what we have here with us today. So you can pick up the first one, which is the normal one. It's got a little white label. It's the one that I gave you, the straight one.
I've got
That's it. That's your sample.
Three bottles. Is that it?
Your hand sanitizer arrived, I see, with essential services.
I've got to show the camera. Where is that? It's phenomenal. I don't know if you can see this. Look at that.
Yeah. So the one with it flat down is obviously this one. This is the Sanmi Ittai. So this is a bottle at 46%. I was very fortunate that they offered me 3 barrels of it, and I jumped at the chance to be involved with them. We're trying quite hard to get the Golden Horse brand into South Africa, because these guys, they seriously are talented at blending. They really know what they're doing. And the liquid inside those whiskies are phenomenal. We will make sure in our marketing that people realize it's Scotch whiskey blended by Japanese, and we'll sell it that way, because we don't want to be jumping on a bandwagon of pretending to be Japanese. But it is a brand of whiskey that's been over 40 years old. So we didn't start making it now to jump on the Japanese bandwagon. It's a thing that's always been there. So if you pour yourself one of these, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just a phenomenal, like, I've been very fortunate enough to taste some Hanyus by themselves. And this whiskey, for me, what he did with those sherry casks, you know.
Should I pour all 3, Hector?
No, one's fine, yeah. So immediately on the nose, you get this sort of sherry feeling about it. So you can see, but it's old sherry wood. It's more like when you walk in the distillery itself and you get hit with a sherry butt, you know. You just get that lovely sort of unctuous note that comes up. Yeah. So it's just one of those whiskies that, if you've ever got to taste a Hanyu, it does exactly that. It's got this sort of mild, musty wood note with this hint of sort of sherry. And think more sort of like a Fino sherry, which is exceptionally dry. It's got that sort of character about it. And then on the back end, you get a little bit of dry notes. Should maybe remind you a little bit of hay and that sort of character coming in.
It's got a very inviting aroma. It pulls you in, and it's almost... I don't know if it's the smell of my glass that's gone through the dishwasher. That's why I smelled the second, which is awful. But it's got a mix of would it be fair to say sort of Christmas pudding, Christmas cake? Or is that the glass that's influencing it?
No, definitely. That cherry note is always going to give you those Christmas flavors. So raisins and nutmegs and cinnamons and all that sort of spice are always going to come through from sherry casks. So it's got both the wine influence. Now most Christmas puddings have got sherry inside them. So think of those dark fruits and those toffees and notes all come together. When I add water, it's amazing. It opens up beautifully, like a sort of Viognier Chenin Blanc sort of style of wine. So it gets this real fresh hit of fruit, which is quite incredible when you think about it, because, you know, it's a whiskey that's got potentially 20-year-old plus spirits inside there to still have this fresh melange of sort of fruit is quite interesting. Then on the palate.
Have we tasted it neat? I got left behind there.
No, I hadn't tasted it neat. So you can tell me what you think of it neat. The sort of first impression for me is always that, wow, this is a big whiskey, but it never gets fat and lazy. It just sort of, it stays proud and strong, but it's supple and it's smooth and it's easy and it's, A
lovely balance between that supple smoothness on the mid palate and then that lovely spice on the side that keeps you salivating. And dare I say, almost fruity.
No, 100%. So this has got beautiful, sort of, for me, pitted fruits and dates and dark prunes, and all those sort of characters come through beautifully, which for me is a typical sort of Hanyu style of whiskey. That's exactly what it is. And then when you do add the water, you'll see it opens up even more, and you get this sort of real crisp sort of Chenin Blanc style wine note coming through, lots more fruit, and then you really get lots and lots of wood note coming through as well once you've added that water. And on the palate, again, it's just such a beautiful, subtle balance.
There's now with the second Torsten, yeah, there's a lovely aroma of kind of cooked butter as well on the neat.
Yeah, almost that rancher effect that you find with using French oak.
Yes.
Which is quite interesting because we know for a fact that obviously Hanyu were using 95% ex-sherry butts. And then they've specifically gone and seasoned new sherry casks and they've done the finish. So once they've done the blend, they put them back into sherry butts again. So they definitely have done that sort of slightly differently to what we've seen before. And this is interesting, the label as well. They give me a whole set of labels to choose from. I'm just going to get it into the camera there. I don't know if they can see it. So it's quite a beautiful Japanese art sort of style. So they give me 3 barrels every year. This is what we bottled last year. We're probably not going to bottle this year just because this year was probably a waste of time for everybody else. But yeah, so I'm quite excited about the fact that they have given me the honor to bottle these for the South African market and sell them. And that they've given me allocation for 3 more bottlings as well. So it is quite exciting to be part of them. And it really is a piece of history because this distillery was dismantled in 2001, so you won't ever see it again. So this is the last legs. And it's good that, and then a lot of people criticize it and saying, oh yeah, you know, guys trying to rip off Hanyu or water it down. That's not the case at all. The guy selling Hanyu for 30,000 Rand a bottle, we feel is the ripoff. And yeah, we're capturing the essence of a Hanyu, the distillery. I think it is there, it is present. It's not, we're not claiming this is a Hanyu single malt. It's a blended malt that includes Hanyu in the blend. And it really for me delivers the style that Hanyu would have done. But moreover than that, Teo Shuzo from day one were blenders, you know. And the tribute is to those 3, the blenders that started it all. And in the way it was trying to emulate Scotch, created something that was 100% Japanese. And it's a hell of a thing that they did that. And that's through their art of blending, through nothing else, but their ability to blend whiskey is what put them on the map today. Unfortunately, they never saw the benefit of that in their time. But their son, the grandson, Akuto, is doing exceptionally well with Chichibu Distillery. So I think that will continue for them for quite a long time going forward as well.
I was going to ask you, so just in terms of what's in our glass, what would be the minimum age? Because you were saying that there's like 30-year-old barrels, eh?
Yeah, some of them is old. So the actual Hanyu itself will be a minimum of 20 years old. The Hanyu itself will be at least 20. But then most of the other stuff, they don't give me a full disclosure of the blend. But it will probably have a little bit of Scotch in and a little bit of modern Japanese in as well. So I think there would be some whiskies as young as 5 or 6 years old in there. All just to try and keep us to that price point. So this is not a cheap whiskey by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it's 1,200 Rand a bottle.
That was the next question, yeah, sure.
Yeah, for a 500 milliliter bottle. So it's not cheap, but compared to the 30,000 Rand you're going to pay for a Hanyu single cask, we felt that this was far more better priced. And like I say, he's captured Hanyu beautifully, I believe, personally. If I think of all the casks of Hanyu I've ever tried in my life, I think the essence is there. And for me, the Japanese is 100% present. So whether it's this or Hokkaido or a Takasura or even one of Suntory's Akushus that you're drinking, these whiskies all resonate the same parts of my palate and emotions. So I'm quite happy with what they've done there. Then the next one, which came in the hand sanitizer, and the reason I use that is because it does come in at 57% alcohol. So you may as well use it as hand sanitizer. So of 2 barrels, the one we watered down to 46%, which is the one you tried now. And now this one we just left as is out of the barrel. We didn't water this one down at all. So it came in at a massive 57%. And the interesting thing, most 57 and 60% that we do, when you give them the nose, they're quite big and almost make your eyes tear. But this one is so subtle. It just sort of, it's exactly the same as the first one, but it almost feels fresher and younger than the one that we watered down. It almost feels like, wow, this one's got a little bit more life to it. It's got a little bit more fruit, a bit more wood structure going through it.
But a garden orchard kind of aroma. When you walk out into an orchard, that whole mix of the blossoms, of the fruit.
Yeah, for me, it's that warm autumn afternoon where there might be some fruit that's decaying there on the side that went past summer, but there might be some fresh and sort of richer flavors. Yeah, definitely. I find that to be a Japanese thing, though. So whenever
Okay.
Japanese oak is being used, some people will think more in the style of, if you've been to Japan, they'll think more of going into a temple where you get the sandalwood that's been polished and they just water the wood, and you get that note of wet wood
Yeah.
and sandalwood and polish and all those kind of notes. But I think it is an autumn garden for South Africa. I think is 100% correct. But obviously, if we were in Japan, we'd be thinking incense and sandalwood, which is also correct. But I think that's the same emotion and the same flavor.
And that sandalwood actually transfers to a simpleton like me as a very faint kind of male fragrance. It smells like a gent's fragrance, and that's obviously the sandalwood.
You used to have Magic Mike in your office burning incense all the time. So like it's almost that same hint, like when you come walking in the front door, hint that he's there, So it does sort of tobacco note and incense note that's very present. And it's just, I mean, at the higher alcohol, I think the nose is much nicer than at 46.
Yeah.
But for me, on the palate, I prefer the 46 on the palate to the 57. But in any case, you decide for you.
You know, it's interesting going back to this 46% nose. Obviously, I've had a bit of water added to it. It's almost got a little bit more zest in the nose. It's got a little bit more of a Sprite, of a lemon, citrusy kind of zest to it. Whereas this 56%, 56%, softer and earthy. As it's sitting in the glass, it's becoming more earthy in nature. Very interesting.
No. The palate in this one screams at you, but it's beautiful and sweet, but the spice note and the intensity of it that it delivers, you'd think this is 10, 15 years younger than the whiskey before. It just speaks of youth. And that's just that high alcohol that's singing all those high notes, and you kind of miss the bass notes, which is why I think I prefer the 46%, because I think the 46% gets Hanyu to its core, what it tastes like, whereas this one is more a modern take on Hanyu. Sort of 20 years later, this is like giving it a facelift and a revive and plastered that across to everyone. Yeah,
I'm finding it difficult to decide a favorite between the two, because, as you say, each has got their own. And I initially I like that softness with the spice on the side, and it's interesting. It keeps you kind of wanting to sip more because it's interesting. But then this one, so incredibly bold in its flavors, that it also makes you salivate and want more, because you're like, wow, that's got chutzpah,
Yeah, it is amazing. Like people often hear the term mouth watering, but it's only when you drink car strength whiskies that you understand what they're talking about. And your mouth is like, it's almost as though when you put it in, just gushes.
I'm getting more of that citrusy zest now that I've added water to the.
And water thing for me, because it because when I added water to the car strength, it's a very strange note that it opens up for me. It almost goes to a sort of a balsamic vinegar note, on the nose. It sort of opens up a real tart and acidity that comes through. And I'm thinking there were quite a few Hanyu casks out there that had light peatings in them. And I'm thinking this barrel probably had a little bit of peat in it along the way somewhere. So when we release that alcohol, that's when we get the peat note. But it's not a big full-bodied peat. It's just the acidic note that peat is, because peat is obviously carbolic acid. So I think that's what we're getting that sort of sprightly acidity from. But it's beautiful on the palate as well once you water it down slightly. It just gives you a good vibrancy.
Is it weird to say that I'm picking up a nose of kind of Coca-Cola? Would that be the carbolic that you were talking about?
So if you remember earlier, you picked up the lemon rind and the citrus note. So it is related to the acid inside this. So it is a little bit of the carbolic, but Coca-Cola is made of a combination of citrus and spices. So you take fruit, so you will take orange, lime, and lemon zest with nutmeg and cinnamon, and you boil it up with sugar. That's how you make Coca-Cola. They obviously do add some codeine and other stuff later on, which gives you the addictive part, that and the sugar. But if you make a home cola, those are the flavors you would sing by. So all those flavors you picked up in the nose, you would have picked up now in those notes. So that's what will translate to Coca-Cola. And you're 100% right, because the adding of the water kicks the sweetness through big time. You get that real, so you got all those citrus carbolic notes that are in Coca-Cola, and suddenly when the sweetness there, it goes, aha, there it is, that's Coca-Cola. And that is exactly how Coca-Cola works. So it takes good body of citrus and spices and nutmeg and cinnamon, bang that together, and then kill it with sugar to sort of really get it out there. You know?
Very interesting.
So that's exactly, yeah.
Going back to the previous, to the 46%, that nose keeps you thinking. It really does, doesn't it? You just want to, I mean, as a wine person, I just want to keep nosing that. That's lovely. Sure.
Yeah, I think both these whiskies, and this is typical, why I'm very convinced that the percentage of Japanese whiskey involved is high, because that is Japanese whiskey. It evolves in the glass while you're speaking, while you're talking. It just keeps on going. And if they've got nothing else right, they've got that 100% right. If I had to put this in a tasting of Japanese whiskies, it would not stick out any differently. It's 100% in the style that Japanese people make whiskey. And I think that's why it is. The person who's going to be a bit disappointed with this whiskey is those big sherry heads. People that love these big, massive sherry-style whiskies that are looking for that big overkill of PX and Oloroso sherry, because it's not. This is like a Fino sherry. So it's quite funny, because the guys who love sherry-style whiskies, that's why they go for this one, and then they become a little bit disappointed by it, because it's not the typical PX Oloroso. But if they were real sherry fans, they'd understand Palo Cortado and Fino is what you're trying to get in whiskey. The Oloroso and PX is cheap man's sherry,
yes.
Whereas Fino and PX is actually Fino and Palo Cortado is the style that you're really trying to make. And I think that's where this one delivers. So if you're going in there thinking you're going to get a big Oloroso sherry cask, you're not. You're going to get a lovely Fino style, which is different. It's not what people are used to, unless you're a big sherry fan. So unfortunately for guys looking for Macallan, Glenfarclas, all those big sherry styles, or even the Karazawas from Japan, if you're looking for those style sherry whiskies, you're not going to get it. If you're looking for something that is authentically, I believe, Hanyu style and Hokkaido, if anyone remembers the original Hokkaido releases, that's the person this will really emulate with. And then I just know the guys that love their Japanese style whiskey. This is like one of the pillars of Japanese whiskey that unfortunately is no longer with us. So don't miss out on that history. If you can afford to pay the 30 grand on the Hanyu, by all means do. But if you can't, this is as close as you're going to come to the real thing.
I think I'll definitely take a bottle of that. Thank you. I don't know how I'm going to fetch it or deliver it or what.
Send it as an essential service with and a squirty bottle.
You know what in terms of what you were saying there about the Oloroso, what is refreshing about this as well, as you say, is that that sherry doesn't dominate, and it really does keep you intrigued, but it also offers the kind of taste or the profile that you would get on a sherry butt. So yeah, they've done very well. Wow, I'm impressed.
Yeah, look, I think the guys behind this are one of the most respected families in Japan. Their first, like their biggest work that they do is really Scotch. They look after a lot of Scotch brands in there, and I'm very fortunate to have got involved with these guys, and they're giving me quality whiskies as well. And yeah, look, I think I'm very happy with what we're going. I can't wait to get Golden Horse so that people can see what these guys are capable of, because the Japanese whiskies that have come through, the ones that have made the big, look, Nika from the Barrel has done exceptionally well, which is 100 whiskey, and again, it's got that sherry finish. So whilst those are doing well, people haven't really seen the Japanese bending skill until you've drunk a Golden Horse, as an example, and that's 100% Scotch that they're blending there. Wow, they know what they're doing.
This is amazing. So now, what's the next one that you're going to take us through? Because I see we've still got bottles there.
That was just the two. So you've got 3 samples of both.
Got you.
But
Okay.
that's just the 2 that you.
That is fantastic, Hector. Thank you for introducing me to something completely different as well in terms of Japanese whiskey. It's fascinating to learn. And of course, if people want to order now, they can, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. If they go onto Whiskey Shop website, I'm trying to think who else. I think Norman Goodfellas have got it on their website as well. And obviously, we'll catch up with deliveries once lockdown is done. I don't think I showed you the car strength bottle, but it's that one there. Slightly different label. And I think what we're going to do with the next cask as well is we're going to actually run a competition before the time. I'll send the different labels outside for people to have a look at. And then whoever votes for the most will actually use that label. Because they always send me 20 or so different label choices. And it's just a little bit of fun to actually be involved in picking the label as well.
Excellent. That sounds absolutely sensational. I don't know what else to say, but thank you. That was very, very interesting.
No, perfect. And that is basically all we have to say.
You've broken up slightly, so we've lost you. So just stay there. Don't say the word. I know what you want to say.
Like I said, the world out there is bleeding, and you are out for good interviews. Hopefully we can support some more of the bar guys going forward. But they obviously want to be able to sell, which is...
Yeah. I've lost you again, Hector. So if we get you
I can hear you fine, but I've lost visuals 100%.
Okay, I've got you back in terms of voice. So yes, just repeat the last bit you were saying, please, because I think we all lost that.
No, I was just saying that obviously going forward with the 2Macs&aDramS, we'll try and get some more of the bars involved, but the guys aren't really in that space at the moment. They're sort of going, oh, they don't really want to be it because they can't do any sales. So hopefully things will change rapidly, and then we can get back into sales and back into interviewing people that are working in the industry and hopefully support them and grow their brands as well.
Excellent. Well, I think there's only one thing left to say until next time. We say, Slang Java.
Slang Java.